Archaeology is literally digging up the past. Sometimes you find dinosaurs, and sometimes you find mysterious artifacts. It is wondrous to know that just a single discovery can reveal so much. How old civilizations lived, what secrets they left behind, and even mysteries we never knew existed. Archaeology is amazing, and sometimes lucky scientists come across a find so strange, so unexplainable, that it shocks even the most radical minds. From the Book of the Dead to an alien-like skull, here are 15 mind-boggling discoveries that will keep you up at night. Number 15. Vampire mummies. Forget the wooden stakes. In the 16th century, people had their own ideas about how to deal with vampires, and it was brutal. In Venice, Italy, archaeologists uncovered a mass grave filled with so-called vampires, and every single one had a brick or rock shoved inside their mouth. The reason? Well, to stop them from rising from the dead and feasting on the living. At the time, plagues were running rampant, and people feared that some of the dead weren't actually staying dead. So, they came up with gruesome ways to neutralize potential vampires. Bricks in mouths to stop them from biting, stakes through the heart, and even dismemberment. But in actuality, these vampires weren't like Christophe Lazare. Scientists later discovered they were just victims of the plague, buried in a way that accidentally fueled the vampire myth. Well, humans sometimes forget that a dragon cannot be a donkey, and a dead person cannot be a vampire. Number 14. A pit full of severed hands. Egypt is full of ancient tombs and burial sites, but this was something else. In Avaris, a team of archaeologists expected to find the usual: mummified pharaohs, golden artifacts, maybe a cryptic hieroglyph or two. Instead, they found a pit full of severed hands. And here's the thing that makes zero sense. Every single hand was a right hand. No left hands, no bodies, just wrists hacked clean off and dumped into the pit like ancient trash. Dating back 3,600 years, this eerie discovery is believed to be part of a sacrificial ritual. Some historians think warriors chopped off the hands of their enemies as trophies. Others suggest they were offerings to the gods. Whatever the reason, imagine the scene. Hands stacked in pits, the blood-soaked sand of ancient Egypt, and the chilling realization that someone once stood here, slicing these hands off one by one. Number 13. The chilling fate of Incan child sacrifices. The Inca civilization was known for its architectural genius and vast empire, but beneath the surface, some truly dark rituals. One of the most haunting was the ritual of child sacrifice, where children were led to the frozen mountain peaks and left to die. Now, human sacrifices aren't exactly a new concept in history, but the method here is what makes it disturbing. These kids weren't violently killed. They weren't even thrown into fire or drowned. Instead, they were drugged, likely with alcohol or coca leaves, and then sent to sleep in the cold. Slowly, their bodies would shut down from hypothermia as they slept to death. The more creepy part, their bodies, perfectly preserved by the ice, still look like they just closed their eyes yesterday. The hauntingly lifelike faces of these sacrificed children tell a story of a civilization that believed their deaths would bring blessings from the gods. But to us, it's a tragic, chilling fate that no one should have endured. Number 12. Screaming mummies. Ever watched The Mummy and thought, yeah, that's just Hollywood stuff? Well, turns out being mummified alive was a real thing. Back in ancient Egypt, archaeologist Gaston Maspero unearthed a tomb full of mummies with horrifying, wide-open mouths as if they had been frozen mid-scream. Their expressions were so tortured, it was as if they had died in excruciating pain, and that's probably exactly what happened. Many of these victims were believed to be rich dudes who were sentenced to death, possibly for crimes or betrayals. Some archaeologists theorize they were poisoned before mummification. their muscles paralyzed as they lay there, unable to move, waiting for the process to begin. Others think they were buried alive, sealed in their sarcophagi, slowly suffocating in the darkness, their last breath spent screaming. Now, imagine walking into that tomb and seeing rows of screaming mummies staring back at you. Yeah, no thanks. Number 11. A skeleton built from multiple people. Archaeologists expect weird discoveries, but in Scotland they found something straight out of a horror movie. A single skeleton made up of bones from different people. At first glance, it looked like a well-preserved mummy, but when scientists examined it, things got disturbing. Some bones didn't belong to the same person. A femur from one individual, a skull from another, a mix of body parts all stitched together in a single grave. For 10 years, researchers scratched their heads. Was this some ancient Frankenstein experiment? A ritual? A mistake? No one knows why someone would piece together multiple bodies into one burial. The creepiest and most Biden part? The bones were carefully arranged, suggesting someone did this on purpose. Why? That's a question we may never answer. Number 10. The giant claw that left explorers shook. Imagine walking into a cave, torch in hand, and stumbling upon a clawed, rotting creature. That's exactly what happened to a group of explorers in 1986 when they came across what looked like the decaying hand of a monster deep within a cave in Mount Owen, New Zealand. But this wasn't a creature from your nightmares. It was the claw of a prehistoric bird called the upland moa. And here's what made it so unsettling. It was so well preserved that it looked like it had just died recently. The upland moa was a flightless bird that went extinct over 500 years ago. Yet this claw, complete with muscle and skin, looked fresh, almost like it belonged to a creature still lurking in the caves. Did something else preserve it unnaturally? Or was it simply an incredible quirk of nature? Whatever the case, that claw was enough to make grown men freeze in fear. Number 9. The Book of the Dead. Most books are for reading. This one? It's for guiding the dead. The Book of the Dead is no myth. It's a real ancient manuscript, and its pages have been found scattered across different dig sites in Egypt. But the last missing pages? They weren't in Egypt. They were found tucked away in the basement of a museum in Scotland. This book is essentially a collection of spells meant to guide the spirits of the mummified dead back to the afterlife, so they wouldn't get stuck wandering around in the land of the living. Think about that. Ancient Egyptians were so afraid of angry spirits returning that they wrote a whole book of instructions just to help the dead stay dead. The question is, did they know something we don't? Well, if you find, let us know. Number 8. Urine-filled bottles to repel witches. Ever wonder how people in 17th century England thought they could ward off witches? The answer: pee-filled bottles. Yes, you heard that right. Terrified husbands who suspected their wives of turning into witches were told to urinate in a pot. But it didn't stop there. They also clipped their nails, pulled out some hair, and tossed it all into the same jar, topped off with rusty iron nails. The bottle was then sealed and buried, supposedly trapping the witch's power inside. Fast forward hundreds of years, and archaeologists started digging these bottles up. Imagine being the unlucky researcher who cracked open a centuries-old jar of human pee, nail clippings, and decayed hair. Yikes. While we now know witches weren't lurking in every village, it's wild to think how deeply people believed in magic, enough to literally bottle their fears. Number 7. The chilling fate of the bog bodies. Bogs are nature's time capsules. They preserve whatever falls into them perfectly. Unfortunately, that also includes people who were sacrificed. Across northern Europe, archaeologists have unearthed hundreds of bodies buried in ancient bogs, their skin, hair, and clothing eerily well preserved by the acidic environment. Some of them still have fingernails and facial features, looking like they died just days ago, despite being thousands of years old. The most disturbing detail? Many of these bodies were found with nooses around their necks. Some had been stabbed, others had their throats slit, and a few had been tied down and drowned. Historians believe these were sacrificial offerings to the gods, or possibly criminals punished in the most brutal way possible. Either way, these eerie, leathery corpses remain a haunting reminder of how cruel ancient justice and belief systems could be. Number 6. The genocide pit of 15,000 bones. History is full of wars and massacres, but the genocide pit of Durango, Colorado is a rare, chilling discovery. At this excavation site, archaeologists uncovered over 15,000 shattered bone fragments, scattered like someone had smashed people apart and buried them in pieces. The bones, dating back 1,200 years, showed brutal injuries, cracked femurs, splintered ribs, and skulls caved in by blunt force trauma. The most horrifying detail? Weapons used in the massacre were buried alongside the victims, and some still had ligament and muscle fragments attached, meaning they were literally used until the flesh was ripped off. The evidence suggests an entire population was tied up and beaten to death, their limbs systematically broken before execution. Who did this? And why? The mystery remains unsolved, but one thing's for sure: this was no ordinary battle. This was mass murder on an unimaginable scale. Number 5. A Roman bathhouse full of infant skeletons. Ancient Romans loved bathhouses, giant public spas where people gathered to relax, socialize, and wash up. But in Ashkelon, archaeologists found a bathhouse that was hiding something much darker, a pit filled with tiny human bones. Not just a few, hundreds of baby skeletons stacked on top of each other. At first, scientists thought it was a tragic accident. Maybe a collapsed structure had trapped the children inside. But nope. These babies were deliberately killed and dumped there. There were no signs of disease or deformities, meaning these weren't natural deaths. Many believe they were sacrifices, possibly tied to ancient Roman customs or cult rituals. It's one of history's most unsettling graveyards, a place meant for cleansing and purity, hiding an unthinkable secret beneath its floors. Number 4. The doomed fate of the Franklin expedition. In 1845, Sir John Franklin set sail with 2 ships, the HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, on a mission to chart the Arctic. With years of experience and past Arctic expeditions under his belt, Franklin seemed the perfect leader for the journey. But this voyage would be his last. The ships became trapped in ice, which wasn't uncommon for explorers. But this time, unusually cold summers meant they were frozen in place far longer than expected. By 1848, the surviving crew, despite having stockpiles of food still aboard the ships, made a baffling decision. They abandoned their vessels and began a 1,000-mile trek toward a Hudson Bay trading post. Historians believe tuberculosis, scurvy, hypothermia, and pneumonia ravaged the men, causing delirium and desperation. But the most horrifying discovery? Bones found in the area bore cut marks, evidence that the crew, in their final starving days, resorted to cannibalism. They didn't just cut flesh from fallen comrades, they cracked open bones to suck out the marrow. A terrifying end to what was meant to be a legendary voyage. Number 3. Elongated skulls. Are humans and aliens having babies together? Sounds like sci-fi, but when archaeologists uncovered elongated skulls in Mexico and Peru, that's exactly what people thought. The truth is less supernatural, but way more disturbing. These skulls weren't from extraterrestrials. They were from real human children, whose heads were intentionally deformed from birth. Ancient cultures would wrap a child's skull tightly with cloth, forcing it to grow in unnatural directions. Over time, the bones elongated, creating a creepy cone-shaped head. The adults who underwent this process ended up looking bizarrely inhuman. But why? Some believe it was a sign of nobility, an attempt to imitate the gods, or a way to make warriors look more fearsome. Whatever the reason, one thing's clear. These skulls still freak people out today, and for good reason. Number 2. The largest mass sacrifice ever discovered. We've already talked about human sacrifices, but this was the biggest ever found. Near Teotihuacan, Mexico, archaeologists stumbled upon a mass grave of over 150 skulls. These weren't just random victims. They were carefully selected, fully developed adults, all beheaded at the same time. Even weirder, the entire site was once a lake. That means the executions likely took place on a platform over water, their heads rolling into the depths below. Historians believe these sacrifices were for the gods, possibly to ensure good harvests, protection, or victory in war. But no matter how you look at it, 150 people losing their heads at once is terrifying. If this is what we've found so far, imagine what's still buried under the earth, waiting to be uncovered. Number 1. A family of 12. Hunted and eaten by other humans. Cannibalism is one of the darkest aspects of human history, but what archaeologists discovered at a site in Gough's Cave takes it to another level. They found the remains of 12 people, possibly an entire family, who had been butchered, cooked, and eaten. But the most disturbing detail? Their bones had the same telltale marks as animal remains, the kind left behind when people stripped the meat from the bone. Some of the largest bones were even cracked open, just like we do with lamb or beef bones, to suck out the marrow. Scientists believe this wasn't just a desperate act of survival. It may have been ritualistic, where humans were hunted, butchered, and consumed by their own kind. If that's not enough to make your skin crawl, just imagine this. To these ancient humans, the meat on the menu wasn't an animal. It was their neighbors, their friends, maybe even their own family. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content like this. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next one. We'll see